Hello and welcome to this very special video going over the 2026 PWHL expansion process. I'm Mario in Black, and today I'll be walking you through what the league put out regarding the phases of the upcoming expansion. Hopefully this helps you better understand the process. I've put the relevant links below that has the information straight from the source. A lot of these slides are just going to be paraphrased information from those sources, so check those out if you want better broken out information, but I'm going to try to walk you through it and explain this in as best of layman's terms as possible. So let's get right into it. Let's start with some good terms to know. This is going to be a very wordy presentation, as you'll see, so I'd like to hit on some key terms that will come up quite often during this presentation. So the first one I want to hit on is expiring contracts. So a player who is not under contract for the next season is on an expiring contract. That means, they don't have a contract to play for the next season. These are normally called free agents. However, there are certain quirks with them that I'll go over in this presentation that does not make them true free agents. So you only see the term expiring contract used for these players. True free agents can sign with any team at any time. This is not true for this process, so that's why I'm only going to use the term expiring contract. A protected player is a player an existing team is using one of their protection slots on. This means an expansion team cannot sign them. I won't discuss the roster freeze at length, but I wanted to go over it here as it's going to pop up a few times during this. So it's something that's going to happen over the first 4 phases of this process. It basically means that during all of those phases, teams are only allowed to sign players based on the protocols of that phase. No other roster transactions are allowed. That means no contract extensions, no trades, and no signing of any player outside of the bounds of what's allowed in that given phase that they're currently in. So existing teams are the 8 teams that played last year. So it's Boston, Minnesota, Montreal, New York, Ottawa, Seattle, Toronto, and Vancouver. Those are the 8 existing teams that have already played 1 to 3 full seasons. And the expansion teams are the 4 incoming teams. These are Detroit, Hamilton, Las Vegas, and San Jose. These 4 teams don't have team names yet. They're just known by their cities. But you'll see the phrase existing teams and expansion teams come up all the time throughout the next several slides. So existing are the ones that were in the league prior to this season, and expansion teams are the ones that are incoming. All right, I wanted to give a large-scale overview before hitting on all of the bullets within this one by one. This is going to set you up for all the fun nerd stuff later, so you can't tell me you haven't been warned. To set things up, existing teams will submit a negotiation list on who they're targeting to sign. These existing teams will protect 3 players off that list during the first phase. Expansion teams get their first crack in Phase 2, where they will sign 5 players who are unprotected. In Phase 3, existing teams will get 3 further protections, and expansion teams are able to sign up to 3 more players. During Phase 4, expansion teams will add players to the point that they're at 10 using the pool of available players. Phase 5 allows teams to sign players that played for their team last year that have expiring contracts. This comes in two separate dates, one before the draft and one after, the day before the draft and the day after. So during this phase, the PWHL entry draft will happen, and all 12 teams will be picking for 6 rounds. And Phase 6 is the open signing period, where teams will fill out the rest of their roster. So it's a lot of information quickly. I'm going to go through each of these bullet points one by one, so you don't have to remember it all now. I just kind of wanted to set you up with this primer. All right, let's get to the pre-Phase 1 process. So on May 28th, existing teams will submit a list of 10 players they're interested in signing and using one of their protection slots on. This can include players currently under contract to their team or a player from any team on an expiring contract. While this has already happened, as this video is being posted on May 29th, and this happened on May 28th, so yesterday as of the time of this video is posting, the list is confidential, and no one in the public has any access to it, and unfortunately I don't have any connections. I don't work for the PWHL. I'm not affiliated with the PWHL in any way, so I'm not privy to this information. Sorry about that. All right, the final part of this pre-phase process is the preliminary negotiation period on June 1st. So all the teams will have submitted their lists, and this will be compiled into a master list, and all 12 teams can talk with the players on that master list. Contract terms may be agreed to during that time, but nothing can be processed until the phases actually start. As with the team submitted list, this master list will be confidential as well. All right, on to phase 1, and all the fun begins. This is when the roster freeze happens, and this will take place between June 2nd and June 3rd. Existing teams can protect 3 players. These can be players under contract already, or a player on an expiring contract signed to a new contract. These can even be a player from another team on an expiring contract. Whenever a player is signed, it'll use up one of the 3 slots automatically. So say a player is on an expiring contract, doesn't matter what team they played for the previous year. If they're signed, that team is using one of those 3 protection slots on that player by signing them. They can also protect a player that's under contract next year, and it doesn't require signing a new contract as they're already under the contract. So they can just say, hey, we're protecting this player who's under contract next year, and they don't have to go through the whole rigmarole of signing the player, just listing them as a protection. Only players on that master list I talked about last slide can be signed during this time. One caveat for signing a player on an expiring contract from another team is that a team can only lose 1 player like this. So if, say, Ottawa signs a player from Seattle that was on an expiring contract, that means no other Seattle players on expiring contracts can be signed by other teams besides Seattle themselves. So this is the important line of demarcation between the term expiring contract and the term free agent. So if in the league put out information, they use the term expiring contract, which is why I'm using it here. Those players are still tied to their previous teams, even though they're not under contract for next year. A true free agent would be able to sign with any team they're not affiliated with a team or the team they played for last year. These expiring contract players are for the purposes of this expansion process. At the end of each phase, I'm going to put an update on where we are at this point. So here, all existing teams have 3 protected players. There's nothing with expansion teams yet, but that'll change in just about 1 slide. All right, on to phase 2, where expansion teams get to steal players from all your favorite teams. This will take place between June 5th and 8th. In this phase, expansion teams will sign 5 players. These will be all non-protected players as well as players on expiring contracts. Existing teams can only lose up to 3 players during this process. Once that number is hit, all players under contract are basically protected, or kind of quasi-protected for the rest of this phase. Players on expiring contracts do not count toward the 3 players a team can lose. The expansion teams submit a list of 20 players to the league that they are interested in using their 5 slots on. This is called the Exclusive Negotiation Target List, or ENTL for short. I'll come back to it a few times as the 20-player list in the future. This list is important because it's the only time expansion teams can negotiate with players that are specifically on expiring contracts for the rest of this process. If a team puts a player on this list and that player is on an expiring contract and they don't sign that player here, they're effectively locked out of that player for the rest of this process. Expansion teams can only negotiate with players on this list, and of course the list is confidential. If somehow everyone is signed off their list and there's not 5 players on the team signed yet, they can request approval and another name can be added to the list. If they do that, then the players added are not eligible for the 2 special offers I'll go over in the next bullet and the first bullet on the next slide. The big tool the expansion teams have is the Expansion Foundational Offer, or EFO. Each of the new teams get one of these and may only use it on players with expiring contracts. They are binding, so if a team uses it, the player must sign with that team. The player does get to choose the years on the contract between 1 to 4 total. Players signed to this are guaranteed a minimum of $100,000 base salary, along with additional upfront payments for multi-year deals. So they kind of put the little the sweetener in there of players will make more money if they sign multi-year deals to try to, give players the incentive to sign those deals and basically give these expansion teams the tool to get what's likely going to be the best player that they're able to sign, a multi-year offer to kind of set up the foundation of their new team. Continuing on to phase 2, teams also get foundational player offers, or FPOs, to use as well. These also can only be used on players with expiring contracts and have a 2-year minimum with an $80,000 year 1 and $82.5 thousand year 2 base salary as minimums. These are non-binding, so a player can decline it. If a player does decline, then they must be signed by the end of phase 3. If that happens, the salary requirements change, but it's basically 90% of what is shown here. In the case where a team doesn't have 5 players, then a process will occur where all remaining teams will select unprotected players. It's only players under contract for the next season that will be selected here. There's no expiring contracts that are allowed to be selected. So, updating you at the end of this phase 2, the existing teams still have the 3 protected players, and all the new expansion teams have 5 signed players. No more, no less for any of the existing or expansion teams here. Moving on, we're going to phase 3, where all 12 teams get on the fun all together. This is the preliminary open signing period, and it will take place between June 10th and June 12th. Expansion teams can sign up to 3 more players on expiring contracts. They'll need to be at 10 by the end of phase 4, so if they don't sign 3 players here, they'll have to make up for it in phase 4 to get up to the 10. Existing teams can protect 3 additional players. As with phase 1, any signed player will count toward the 3 protection slots here. So an existing team signing a player counts as a protection slot, and an expansion team signing a player counts toward the 3 additional players they can sign in this phase. Any player that got an FPO in phase 2 and did not agree to those terms must sign with somebody during this time at the rate of at least 90% of the FPO minimum that I discussed on the last slide. So at the end of phase 3, we have existing teams with the 6 protected players total, the 3 from phase 1 and the 3 from this phase 3. And expansion teams have somewhere between 5 and 8 players, depending on how many they sign during this phase. So the 5 they got from phase 2 and the 0 to 3 they got during this phase. So you'll see later there's going to be a big open and signing period. This is, as it states, the preliminary open signing period where all those expiring contract players can sign wherever they want. Existing teams can protect additional players that are under contract for next year if they wish, but they can also compete against the expansion teams and sign, players that are on expiring contracts and set to be on the market. All right, are you still with me? We're over halfway through now. We're on phase 4. I bet you're an expert by now. This is the expansion team signing period. It will happen between June 14th and June 15th. Phase 4 has expansion teams build their rosters out to 10 players. Any player not signed or protected during phases 1 to 3 can sign with expansion teams during this time. So remember that 20-player list that I talked about earlier? Any players that were on that list in phase 2 for a team and they're on expiring contracts are no longer eligible to be selected by that team at this point. So if one of the expansion teams puts a player on the list in phase 2, that player does not get signed during phase 2 by anybody, and they're still eligible at this point, that team that had them on their list would not be able to select them if they're on an expiring contract. Similar to phase 2, if a team doesn't reach 10 players by the end of this phase, there will be a selection process for it. As with phase 2, only players under contract are eligible here. No expiring contracts are able to be signed if it gets to this point. You have to fill out up to 10 players using players already under contract and are not protected by the existing teams. So at the end of phase 4, the existing teams still have the 6 protected players, and the expansion teams will have the 10 signed players. There's no more, no less for either side here. The existing teams will have 6 protected players, and the expansion teams will have 10 players. All right, on to phase 5. It's a bit tricky since it happens the day before and the day after the draft. This is also where the roster freeze ends, and teams can start trading, signing players to contract extensions, and all the other fun stuff they couldn't do earlier. So those first 4 phases were basically the existing teams, using protections to prevent expansion teams from getting certain players, and also the expansion teams setting up their 10-player foundation of sorts. So once we get past phase 4, then the freeze ends and teams can start maneuvering around a little bit more. This phase itself is for existing teams only. Any player on an expiring contract that played for the existing team the year prior and was not signed in one of the prior phases can be re-signed during this period. As mentioned, this will take place the day before and the day after the entry draft. There's a group of players I haven't mentioned yet. They were players that were drafted last year and signed a 1-year contract after being drafted. When a team drafts a player, they hold the rights to that player for 2 years. All of these players are eligible to be signed in the prior phases with their existing team or signed to an expansion team for one of their 10 slots. Any player that makes it to phase 5 without being selected earlier can be given a qualifying offer here. If they're not, or they decline that offer, then they're able to be signed by any team during the next and final phase. So at the end of phase 5, if we're not counting drafted players, which I'll go over next, existing teams have those 6 protected players plus whoever was signed in this phase. Expansion teams don't change. They're still at 10 players. So basically, in summary, this phase is for players that, are on expiring contracts that made it through all the prior phases. All the existing teams get a chance to re-sign those players that played for them last year. So next up is the 2026 PWHL entry draft on June 17th. This will happen in the middle of phase 5, as I mentioned earlier. The draft is 6 rounds with all 12 teams partaking. There will be 72 total picks. All teams will have 6 picks, 1 in each round at the start of the draft. But during the draft, picks may be traded for other picks or other players. So teams may not pick a total of 6 players during the draft if they make any trades during the draft. The draft itself is actually the only time right now that players can trade picks, and they can only trade picks within that draft or picks for existing players. So they can't trade a first-round pick this year for a first-round pick next year. You can only trade draft picks within the draft year you're already in. Vancouver will pick first since they won the gold plan. The rest of the draft order is not known at the time of my posting this. I do look forward to them posting the rest of the draft order approximately 5 seconds after this video goes up. So at the end of phase 5 and with the entry draft included, existing teams will have the 6 protected players, the right to sign any player they drafted, and all the other players that they signed during phase 5. Expansion teams will have the 10 players, those foundational players I talked about earlier from the first 4 phases, and the rights to any of the players that they drafted so they can sign those players as well. In the final phase, you did it. You got to phase 6. Congratulations. There is a couple more slides after this, but this is the last super wordy, informative one. All remaining players on expiring contracts can sign with any team. Any player under contract that was not selected during any of the phases before this will remain under that team's contract and will play for them next season. Yet again, the expansion teams cannot touch players that was on that 20-team list that I discussed in phase 2. So to shine them then when you had the chance. Any player that entered the entry draft and was not selected is eligible to sign with anyone at this point. So after all 6 phases are done, all 12 teams will have signed enough players to fill up a full 23-player roster, along with up to 3 reserve players. This will include all the players signed, protected, selected, or what have you in the prior phases, along with players drafted and signed on with that team, as well as players that were signed in this final phase, phase 6. I want to do a bit of an overview on what the whole thing looks like for the existing teams and the expansion teams. I'll start with the existing teams. In phase 1, these teams can protect 3 players and may only lose 1 expiring contracted player. In Phase 2, these teams may lose up to 3 unprotected players. Remember, players on expiring contracts do not count toward the 3 players they may lose. In Phase 3, these teams will protect an additional 3 players, bringing them up to 6 in total. In Phase 4, these teams may lose additional unprotected players as the expansion team rosters end up at 10 players total. Once this phase ends, the roster freeze also ends, and expansion teams can't poach players under contract anymore. In Phase 5, these teams can sign players on expiring contracts that played for them last year. The draft happens, all the new kids get to dress up all fancy and get selected, and we all look at their birth years and feel old. And then finally in Phase 6, these teams build out the rest of their roster so we get set for the new season. And looking at this from the perspective of the expansion teams, in Phase 1 they don't do anything, they just sit there and they wait to strike. In Phase 2 they will sign 5 unprotected players or expiring contracted players, no more, no less. In Phase 3 they can sign up to 3 more players, giving them between 5 and 8 depending on how things roll for the teams. In Phase 4 they'll get up to 10 players no matter what, no more, no less, by signing those additional players. In Phase 5, these teams won't do anything. It's only for existing teams to re-sign players on expiring contracts. The draft happens during Phase 5, and the new teams get to add players through that process. In Phase 6, as with the existing teams, the expansion teams fill out the rest of their roster and get ready to make their debut seasons. I want to thank you for making it all the way to the end. As of when I was recording this, which is on a Thursday, all this news dropped on a Wednesday. So all happened very quick. I hope I got all the information correct. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below. A lot of this I'm still trying to sort out, but hopefully this kind of gives you some good information on how the whole process works. Do very much appreciate you listening to this. Any interaction is much appreciated. I'll try to get back to more normal, informative videos in the upcoming weeks. One thing I didn't want to do here is I didn't want to talk about, or speculate what players teams may protect or things like that. There's other forms of media that will do that sort of thing. I try to be more informative and, not do I think Boston's going to protect Aaron Frankel or, things like that. I just want to be more informative with how I do things here, but very much appreciated. One of the upcoming videos will be kind of how the game day rosters are constructed, how the lines work, defensive pairs work, and that sort of thing. So look forward to that, and if you have any other ideas, feel free to leave them below. Thank you very much, and have a great day.